Welcome to the Dad Report, a podcast for dads, by dads, about dad stuff.
Join us as we sit down and have meaningful conversations with friends, family, and coworkers.
We will talk about life, family, and so much more while working towards a goal of creating a healthy idea of what it means to be a dad. Well, Chad, good evening.
Hello, Justin. Once again.
Welcome to, I don't know why I welcome you to an episode of the Dad Report. Like, you already know it's coming. You're here. You're a part of this thing. Like, we're welcoming the listeners to you. I don't know why I do that week after week. So tonight's going to be fun.
Just had a realization. So we're setting this up, but somebody who is listening to the episode has already seen the title.
Supposed to have,
So
yes.
they should probably know what it is we're talking about.
They should probably know not to let their kids listen to this episode.
Yes. Yes. So I'm just going to jump right into the deep end, as it were. So tonight we're talking about sex. So if you still have kids around, well, it might be too late, but
yeah,
I would say maybe don't. So
yeah, don't have kids around.
Which is going to be awkward because my wife typically will put this on our Roku, which is on our TV in the living room, and she'll just listen to the Dad Report.
For the whole house to hear?
We'll see what she does for this episode. Yeah, and it's kind of awkward for me because the
amount of embarrassing moments
really don't care to hear my voice.
Yeah, there's also that.
But a lot of times, if there's people on, giving advice, talking about kids, like she wants her kids to hear it. So, yeah, I mean, works for me.
All right.
So, Justin, I know we've in talking with a few of our guests that they've actually been looking forward to this episode, and I have no idea why they have been, but
I think it's just because we're talking about sex.
Yeah, probably.
We should get like a running counter of how many times we say the word throughout the entire episode. Except that I'm too lazy to do that in editing. But it'd be funny.
So, Justin, why don't you kick us off and let's just get this party started?
Yeah, so I think here's how we do this, Chad, and listeners, here's how I want you to hopefully follow along with us. And mind you, we both get lost at times in the forest of thought. But I think we're going to discuss sex from a few different angles. One being kind of like just as a husband who may not have kids yet, but that's a conversation coming down the pipeline. And then comes eventually you snap out of the, ooh, I can't wait to have kids, to the, wait, while she's pregnant. And then after we've had said children, what does that mean for our sex life? And then I think some other areas of conversation that we'll have would be like healthy rhythms, whether you're married with kids or married without kids. And then finally, I think, how do we have the conversation about sex with our children? Something Chad's got more expertise in than I necessarily do. And probably just to help preface, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, how do these two jokers define sex? We hold a more conservative view on this biblically based on our faith. This is not an attempt to offend you. This is just what we hold to. So when we reference sex, we are referencing that sex belongs between one man, one woman for one lifetime. Because that's how it's created and designed. We believe it is the tying of three components, both physical, emotional, and spiritual. And so when we talk about sex, that's what we're referring to.
And also, that's just our experience, right? With us, our spouses, even, and I guess I can't say me talking to my kids about this, like it's the same deal. So,
yeah, I'll be referencing a healthy view of sex from my time within marriage. There's things I'm not proud of pre-marriage, and thankfully God's grace is larger, and so is my wife's grace. But primarily, yeah, referencing within the confines of what I view as healthy. Hopefully that makes sense. And I hope those terms are acceptable, Mr. Bond. I don't know why I said that. Sex makes me giddy. It's one of my favorite things and sometimes not favorite things. I don't think I've ever talked about it with a hot mic. That's not true. I teach middle school and high schoolers. Never mind. Yeah, I totally talked about
Which
it.
I want to get there
We
eventually.
can do it. Let's do it. Tonight's gonna be a
Yeah.
long one. Strap in. Last week was an hour and a half.
So
This might be the 2 hour episode.
so did you want to start with kind of like just got married and then kind of progress from there,
Yeah, why
or
not?
what's your thought? Okay.
I think let's chat there. So let's because I can still remember, and I'm sure you do too, but like I still remember year one and year two. Am I in year three or am I in year four? We will celebrate 4 years in October. So I guess I'm currently trudging my way through year four.
So Megan, if you listen to this,
I love you.
feel free to get onto Justin for him taking a minute to not know how long you've been married. And if you don't say something, that
That's
just
how we
tells
know
us
you
that
don't
you are
listen.
not listening.
Yes.
Love you, Megan. All right, continue. So, yeah,
Yeah. So I
early
guess
marriage.
early marriage. So I guess like let's oh gosh, man, there's so much to unpack here. This is why there, ladies and gentlemen, there are whole podcasts and like groups devoted to just having conversations on the ins and outs haha of sex. I will be making puns and jokes the entire night. I do apologize. I'll try to keep them relatively PG, but you're all supposed to be married and or adults with some maturity who can handle it. Okay. Um I guess like let's start maybe with just very briefly because we do want to get into more of the parenting aspect or as a parent or to be future parent, but like
Yeah.
expectations, especially that year one, like coming into year one, the expectation of like what is sex and how is it going to look and play out in my marriage? Like, how can we set up some of our single guys? Like, I actually know that one of our guests, oh, thank God, he is proposing this weekend. I will leave it there. But the good news is, by the time this episode airs, he will, unless she says no, and that's a surprise to us all, he will be engaged. Just super exciting. But like, I know he listens, or at least I believe he still does occasionally. Um, so like this is a part where it can maybe help set him up for success as they then get closer to eventually becoming one flesh, to use the biblical vernacular.
So go to your that's awesome. And I think I know who you're talking about, but maybe we shouldn't say names just in case. I don't know. I
Just in
don't want to
case
be
she
the one to
says
spill the
no,
beans.
yeah, I don't want,
Yeah.
yeah, or there's that too, yeah.
So let's go, Justin. Let's dig right in.
Oh
Early
gosh.
marriage.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know. I'm thinking like, what? Share something. What went well? What didn't well? And then I'll chime in.
What went well is we occasionally had sex. Uh
Okay.
no, I had this image in my head that we would be like jackrabbits, bro. Can I share that? Am I allowed to share
You
that?
and every male
I
probably
don't
has
know
that
where like
same.
the line is where it's like, am I still honoring my wife? And then what's also being helpful for others? But like, in the spirit of honesty, like, dude, I came into it and was like, this thing about me popping off every night. Like, my mom used to say, before you're married, the devil likes to try and pull you closer together. And so, like, all your hormones are raging, your emotions, you're constantly trying to, you're constantly fighting to keep your hands off each other. And then she says that after you get married, the devil tries to pull you apart, which makes sense. He's always going to attack and counterfeit what God has designed. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
pre-marriage.
smart. I like what you said there. Yeah.
Yes. So pre-marriage, man, I'm like, it was like, man, we're making out all the time. And granted, some of this also is just, okay, where have I dropped the ball in dating my spouse? And that can be a conversation and probably a topic for another day entirely. Because those are things that I'm trying to work back to. Those are things that like finally not because she's, I mean, it's just we there's finally been some conversation where it's instead of me getting defensive, it's like, oh, okay, I need to step up in this arena. Let's go. Which is good. That's how you grow in your marriage and fight for it. But yeah, like, man, we got in there and I was like, well, if our marriage is gonna look anything like it was when we were dating, which, was constantly trying to make sure we didn't cross the lines, then let's go. And then we got in there and it's like, no. Yeah.
Um, one thing for us, and I give total props to Shauna on this. One thing for us that made it easier is feel like she really led in terms of just kind of putting it out there in terms of conversation.
Mm.
Like it not being weird, just talking about it. And I don't know that I did very good with this initially,
Mm-hmm.
but you know how Andy Stanley talks about that being a Christian, it's all about the submission competition. Like it's kind of
Yes.
an image of you holding the door open for somebody and them going after you, and you're like, after you, after you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And getting better at that really helped us. I do remember uh the train wreck that happened on our wedding night.
Oh
You were talking about
no.
expectations, and like we had no idea what the heck we were doing. No idea. And um
How much of this are you allowed to share?
and no, I'm not going into details here, but it just like it did not go to expectations.
Okay.
And at some point I thought back to a conversation I had with the guy um that I worked with. And, this was a little bit into our marriage. And I worked with a bunch of dudes who were not Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're all like, dude, you really have never had sex before you got married?
You're like the
And
40-year-old virgin.
I'm like, yeah, I got married at 21, man. I mean, I
I
don't
know,
know.
I
I
know.
didn't think it was
I
that
know
big of
you
a
I
deal.
know you were, but it's like
But
that's how they reacted. It was like the movie where they're like, "Ooh."
but so one of the other guys who was totally um he did not have the problem that I had. He had lots of experience, right?
Promiscuous.
And yes, and he said he blew me away. He turned to the other guy. He's like, "Dude, this is beautiful." He's like, "They're just kind of paving the way for each other."
Mm.
And I was like, "This guy, he was quite possibly high when he said it. Like, I don't know, but to me, it was kind of a great picture of really how it is. It's like, hey, you know
Yeah,
what?
man.
You can be
Yeah, it's
married
beautiful, bro.
for a long time. Like,
Yeah.
if it takes a little bit to, you know, get good at this thing or,
Mm-hmm.
figure each other out or, working on it, like, it's okay. Like, and I really like those words, like, just really kind of, paving the way for each other in this relationship. And that's not with sex. That's with a lot of things. And
Yeah.
that to me, for whatever reason, this kind of stoner guy that I probably didn't take it as his advice on very many things, but I felt like it kind of just took some of the tension out of it when I began thinking about things that way. And I don't know that I was intentionally doing
Mm-hmm.
that right time and time again, but I was just like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was one cool just thing that just kind of randomly happened. Honestly, I don't know if Sean and I have ever talked about that
That's funny.
because it just kind of came to my mind just a second ago. But yeah, one thing that was awesome is that uh Shauna was, as she's with a lot of things, was very upfront
Mm.
and not want to beat around the bush and just talking about it. And because I'm like, well, I want to talk about this, but is she going to want to talk about it? And she just kind of came
Right.
out with it. I was like, okay, that made that
Easy enough.
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
Um,
cool. I like that
yeah.
pave the way. I heard somebody talk about for those couples who manage to abstain, right? Whether from previous relationships or even with each other. If within marriage, they kind of get to the disappointment, I guess, or even the enjoyment isn't defined by anybody else. It is only defined by you and your spouse. And so you're not constantly going, oh man, was I like the other guy? Was it good enough? And then you have to work through that trauma and unwire that. And so again, it's paving that way. You were able to pave your way for markers of how good you were. And because the other thing too is like, if you guys had never had with anybody else, like, however those first few times went, well, according to Stoner Guy, who if he was probably sober would have been like, yeah, man, you
Sober
sucked.
guy.
You were like way too short or whatever. But to you and Shauna, like, all right, that's the best you've ever had. And the next time is even better. And the next time for that's even, there's nothing else to relate to other than yourself. So if I can challenge any young men and young women out there who are listening to this and are like, man, the world's telling me that I need to be doing this, or maybe you already have, and you're like, I'd like to stop. Like, if that's the only reason why you abstain, man, make that the reason why. Just so that way you're never having to compare or have your significant other / spouse compare. Like you're always setting the next high. I'm still from Stoner Guy here. You're always setting the next high for you in your relationship. By keeping it monogamous. Now, for those of us out there who got a little bit of, a little bit of luggage, all right. First of all, there's grace, and there's forgiveness, and with a little bit of therapy and even just talking with your spouse, you also eventually get to a place where, yeah, that you're back to creating what's next, the best. There's less comparison. It goes away. You or either goes away or you learn how to kind of like, no, that's irrelevant because what I have is deeper than just a physical moment. So, there, dropping that one out there for you. Boom.
Yeah, and I feel like where people get in the weeds is they get all about me and my, wife. Me want to be focused on my needs versus wanting to serve my wife. And that's an easy to get upside down real quick.
Yeah.
And I feel like if both people are focused on that, then you're going to have conversations. You're going to be communicating about it, and it's going to be good. So that is one thing that both of us have really tried to focus on as well, and I feel like that just makes it better for everybody. Like you talk about grace, and you screw up, and it's like, and if Shauna's like, hey, it's cool, like let's just move on. Again, and a lot of these concepts apply like across the board. If I feel like the reaction I'm going to get is not judgment, but grace, understanding, that kind of thing, it just goes much better. And I mean, because you wanted to talk about like being vulnerable. I mean, that's like the thing you do that will make you the most vulnerable over just about anything
you are
else.
exposing everything.
That is the truth.
Literally.
That is the truth. So
there's also a beauty in it. So yeah, there's if you guys want to hear be a deeper, more grounded than my approach, but like I agree with this guy, so I recommend him. But Tim Ross on The Basement, his podcast is called The Basement, and they are all about vulnerability and authenticity. Homeboy talks about sex.
Oh yeah.
All the time. Sex, porn, cheating, and then reconciliation and like husband and wife, marriage, like dude talks about it. I would definitely listen to his, but he's got one where when he talks about marriage, he's referencing First Genesis, to become one flesh. And actually, I read this in a book today where it says it's not that we are better halves of each other and become, it's not like 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1. It's two wholes becoming one, which is it's a representation of the Trinity. That's an aside. We can jump into that later. That's a book called Holy Sexuality and the Gospel by Christopher Yuan. But Tim will say, because he's referencing Paul in First Corinthians, where he says, he says to the man, your body is not your own, it's your wife's. And he says, and wives, your body is not your own, it's your husband's. Actually, I think it starts with the wives, then goes to the men, because it's always, because the men, we love to stop reading after it goes, wives, your body's not your own, it's your husband's, so be submissive, and not in like the creepy legalistic Baptist way. But it's back to Andy Stanley's mission competition. And we'll have to stop reading there, except the next thing Paul says is that, men, our bodies aren't ours either. It belongs to our wife. And so what Tim says is, he says, in marriage, when you look into the face of your spouse, it is supposed to be like looking into a mirror. Like when you hurt her, you hurt you. And that's been, I mean, I don't know how much that is starting to execute itself out in my marriage, but I know that it resonates in my head. I know that it's sitting there bouncing around, pinballing, going, when I say this thing and it makes her mad, I should be hurt by this. And some of that also, I think, is just cool for me to watch. Not that she's getting hurt, but like the growth that I've gone from like year 1, where it's still like we're almost 2 independent people, to where now is year 3. And mind you, this is the journey of a lifetime, right? This is the journey of marriage. But like, I feel more of one flesh with her at year 3 than I did at year 1. Like, it takes time to grow, and it's not just through sex, though sex is probably the most powerful bonding factor, but it's also through the conversations, the dinners, the playing video games with each other, taking time to put down your phone or put down whatever your vice is, where you are self-absorbed and get to know your significant other. So, but there you go. Now you guys have that one. When you look at your spouse, you're also looking back at yourself. And Tim takes that way deeper and talks about sex in that context. And I don't have the memory or probably the confidence to talk about it in the same way that he does, but I trust him.
It's an interesting concept. I like that. I like it. Yeah. Because we really want to talk about the one flesh thing when we feel like we're being, violated, misused, something in some kind of way that's negative. It's like, but that's good. I like that. I like that. I like that thought. Okay. So what's next? You want to
feel confident we've taken care of some of our single people here, or year 1 marriage? I guess just like, let's leave with some. So what's some advice then? Now that they've heard a little bit of our experiences, what's some advice for our soon to be year 1 married people?
I would say, before you walk down the aisle, do some type of premarital counseling.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're getting married by your pastor, for example, like we did, go through whatever they do. If not, like, meeting with like, another counselor, going through some type of curriculum is great. I thought we knew each other great. We went through with my was my youth pastor. He now is the pastor of the church. But I thought, I was like, we've talked about just about everything. And man, we got through this, like, we ain't talked about jack. Like,
amazing.
So yeah,
Megan and I did it twice.
That's right. I remember you telling me that.
Yeah.
Do as much of that up front as you can. Like, just practically, what you're getting. Like, if you're going to buy a car, whether it's a new car or a used car, you You talk to the guy, he's like, you got to make sure that you change your oil. You got to make sure that you do this, that you do that. And so you're educated. So you're not waiting 6 months down the road when there's smoke coming out of the hood. And you're like,
That's
wait, what did
right.
I do? Like, that's the way we treat relationships a lot of the time. Gosh, that's a great analogy.
That is a good
It
one.
really is.
That is a good one.
There are so many analogies you can make
Analogies.
with cars. It's
Just be careful
like,
because some of them are nasty. Some of them I hate.
yeah. And, you can, analogies aren't perfect, right? But I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
with this,
That one was good.
it works. Um,
That's actually good advice for anybody is like taking time, whether you do it with a trusted, I would say friend, but don't bring friends and family that you like are really close to into your marital affairs. They're always going to have a side. I don't care how much they promise you they're neutral. It doesn't matter. They're going to side with one of you because that's how much they love one of you. You married into a friendship or family member, or you brought your spouse into a friendship or family member. Like my best friend, 9 times out of 10, despite how much he could probably tell me to my face, dude, you're being like, you're at fault as the husband. At the end of the day, if the worst of worst of worst should happen, he's not going to turn his couch away from me. Like he'll tell me I'm wrong, but he's also going to let me crash. Um, but I think yeah, like just finding someone to do counseling with, whether it's a pastor on staff or you go to a counselor, and you don't do it when crap hits the fan, but you do it as like a routine maintenance. You check in once a year, twice a year, kind of like an oil change. Just make sure you guys are communicating well. Because one of the things I was going to say is communication up front for sure, whether it's before you get married or even before you enter a new season, if you're able to see a new season coming. One of the pastors I listened to, he said one time, he goes, frustration is just unmet, uncommunicated expectation. It's the result of unmet, uncommunicated expectation. And it's right. I mean, for me, like we went through premarital twice. We did it once before we got engaged with a legit mental health counselor. I don't know why I use mental health. She's a legit counselor, like psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. And then the second time was with people through our church. We were more open, I think, in the first one with people from our church. We hit that conversation on sex, and I said, nope. I said, I don't feel comfortable with these people, and so I ain't gonna talk to them. And we didn't. We just sat there and looked awkward the entire time. And then Megan and I didn't talk about it. I think we both assumed we'd be fine. Honeymoon goes great, and then we didn't talk about what comes after. And like, yeah, there was frustration on my end because my expectation was we gonna be up in here like bunny rabbits, and it wasn't happening, and I was upset and mad and not getting sleep because the first month was really hard to adjust to somebody else in the bed or even just living with somebody else. That's my 50 cents.
yeah. And I mean, I guess another thing I would say, and I've heard Shauna, say this verbatim. She'll tell me like that she has this conversation with friends that she has where, she'll get a question like, oh my gosh, does Chad want to have sex like all the time, like my husband does? And she's like, you don't like it? She's like, it's fun, you
Oh
know?
man.
It's like, this is the person you're gonna be with forever. Like,
Learn to
enjoy
enjoy
it.
it. We can't say
And
that. I can't say that with a I,
no, and you can't say that to your
yeah.
spouse, to your partner.
Yeah.
Now you can say that to, like one of your buddies, but and this is the context, right? So she's having and she's telling me, and she's not saying who it is, right? But she's like,
Mhm.
hey, I was having a conversation with a girl today, and and she's like, I was like, I don't get that. Like, I enjoy it. It's not like, you know, someone's holding a gun to my head. Like,
Right.
this is enjoyable. Um, and and I think when she's had that conversation, like it is kind of surprising, but
Well,
Like,
maybe that leads into healthy rhythms. So there are people, right, with a higher drive and a lower drive. And then on top of that, you've got other factors that play into. So this young girl that Shauna's counseling, perhaps that young girl came out of the, I say young girl, I don't know if she's young or
yeah,
not.
no, these are like, let's be clear. These are like peers, right? So one of her
Right.
friends is
Right.
married, around
Not
the same
young.
age,
Well,
whatever.
Shauna, I don't mean that in offensive. No, Shauna, you are, I don't know. I can't. Chad, you Song of Solomon, your wife, I'll Song of Solomon mine. Um, but uh, if that person was raised in the purity culture of the 80s and 90s, and we're starting to see the effects of this, where it's sex is bad, no, 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 you should have no desire, no desire, no desire, no desire, and then they get married and we flip the script instantly. I mean, major jump cut, and we're like, this is good, you should enjoy it, it reproduces. But then you're like, well, hold on. And so if you grow up with this notion of like it's always bad, I can see how, like, as you're trying, if you don't take intentional steps to recognize that in yourself, and I think that's what it is. I think some people don't see the intent. Some people, this is where I think sex positivity should be rooted biblically. Like, that's going to offend people in here who can be like, I don't believe in the Bible. I don't believe in. That's fine. But you know what? It's like trying to read the manual of a Ferrari and putting the wrong oil in it because you didn't read it, because you said, I don't need the manual from the guy who made the car. I drive a Honda. I know how this works. I'm preaching. I know it. God designed sex. It's not like math. If he designs it, I want to know how he intends it to be. And I think when we start manipulating the instructions or even the boundaries of where it falls into, we fall into hurt. And so we fall into people who, I don't have a drive. Therefore, I don't want, when my husband wants it, why does he always have to want it? And instead of learning, okay, where do we come to a healthy rhythm? Well, like in my personal experience, some of it wasn't desire. There is some there, but some of it's not drive or desire or even enjoyment. It's there's a physical barrier. But are you willing to take the steps to go, this is an important enough aspect of my marriage to begin asking questions about my own body, whether male or female, whether you're the husband or the wife, right? Asking questions of, okay, why do I not saying that there's a certain for some couples once a week is great, for some couples once every 2 weeks is great, once a month is great. For other couples, you are the jackrabbits and I envy you, and you're like 4 times a week. Kudos, bro. Like, fist bump it later. But you probably also have your other issues, like, sometimes I'm kind of grateful the only thing I fight sometimes about is sex. I'd much rather have that argument than about money is so out of my wheelhouse. I cannot argue on that one. I don't know if that's making any sense, but that's where I'm trying. I guess I'm coming back to, like, this person is like, for Shauna telling her that for Shauna that it's fun. Like, Shauna has a healthy perspective. She understands that God created sex for recreation and reproduction, along with just growth in general. Like, that's what's bonding her to you. And that not only that, you have the privilege of doing it for a lifetime. Like, if y'all have one bad night, if Megan and I have one bad night, the beauty of marriage is I can try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
I can try again next week. When you're dating and you're doing it, you decide you're going to do it outside of the confines and the safety of marriage. You might do it wrong once, and your other person on the other side of you is going to be like, I didn't like that, and I'm not going to give you a chance to try again. Deuces. And now we're creating trauma and we're creating insecurity and throwing some other stuff in there. So,
Well, and I'm just gonna say,
I'm over
like,
here rattling.
if
I know.
you are listening to this podcast by Justin and Chad, and you're single and you're not wanting to do this the biblical way, like, you're just coming to the wrong place. And you're coming to the wrong place. Like, y'all know who we are. So that's just kind of
We love you.
how we are. But you're right. There has been damage done, and um but that comes back to, you know, using this as an opportunity to serve the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've been in a relationship with someone for a while, and it's like, Like, Justin, if I come up and I see you and I go to shake your hand and I see you've been crying,
Yeah.
or I see you're just pissed, like you're hangry or something, right? I'm like, oh, something's going on with Justin. Maybe I should talk to him about that.
Yeah.
Well, when you're dealing with like your spouse, who, by the way, you see every single day, you live with, right? You share things with, and you're like, oh, well, it's time. And you just see the other person isn't
Mm-mm.
reciprocating, that they're upset,
Mm-mm.
that something, right? I mean, it's like you get to know this person and you realize, oh, something's going on. Maybe I
Yeah.
shouldn't make this time right now about what I want, what I think I need, that we're gonna, there's maybe something else going on that we need to get into. And that sounds like really elementary, like, yeah, Chad, we know. Um, but I've had conversation with people where it's like, they talk about their using finger quotes needs, right? And uh, and I'm just not, I just got no time for that, because
Yeah.
there's no basis in psychology, in
Yeah.
the Bible, in common sense, in any of these places for anything like that. So yeah, and so yeah, so I think a lot of these things um go together. Like, I know people that were jackrabbits that wind up getting divorced. Why? Well, because they probably did a lot of that and not a whole lot of talking or other things. So
Money or
um
kids, right? Like
yeah.
the three big
So
fights any marriage sees is money,
yeah.
kids, and sex.
So again, I mean, I think you go into this next phase when you've got kids, whatever, like, it's the same thing. It's, you got to be talking to your spouse, not just about this, but about everything.
Yeah.
And you observe and you say, oh, my wife looks to be upset. Maybe this is not the right time for that. Maybe we got other stuff we got to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, but this is something to talk about too. And it's easy to get kind of into a um like a pattern where it's just like, this is what we're doing. And um yeah, so you be a student of your mate, and if they like to change it up, then change it up, right? um so I think that's about as far as I'm gonna go down that road. But uh
He was getting
but
heated,
but
y'all.
seriously, like, it's just like every other area, it is more intimate, it's more revealing, it
Yeah.
all of those things. But I really think all the same principles apply. Like, how am I gonna know that my wife is enjoying when we go out on a date if we don't talk about it? Hey,
Right.
is there a new place that you like to try? um how was it? Did you enjoy where we were? If you're not observing them and talking to them, like, anyway. um Again, I think this is pretty elementary, but I talk to people all the time who just, they don't do it. So
And then yeah, student of your wife, the thing you just said, student of your spouse.
yeah.
I think I should say that because wives, it goes for you too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with y'all being elevated, and I'm glad that culture from 100 years ago caught up to a place where you are elevated. But for those of us who subscribe to Jesus and the Bible, um, God didn't set it up as a one way, okay, there's God and then your wife. Like, he set it up as as Chad said earlier, referenced Andy Stanley, submission competition. You're studying each other. Like, women, study your husbands. If you want to be pleasured well, study him. I'm not saying not saying you submit and roll over and whatever he asks you to do, but like, he's going to be in a better mood when you pick up on the little things that he enjoys, whether it's like chocolate pie or it's I don't know. I mean, Joby always says it's the Hercules. Men want affirmation. If I can say that on this podcast, we really don't care about as much about the I love yous or the emotional lovey dovey. Some of us do. We're weird, but a lot of us do care about affirmation. Just tell us that we're strong and we're enough for you.
Well, and
Dude.
a lot of couples I see get in the weeds, they um they forget that, as as believers, we're called to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That
Mm-hmm.
includes the person you're married to.
Mm-hmm.
So the uh people I have known where the husband is and dad is like the king of the castle whole
Yeah.
thing, like I just don't have time for that. And if that's what you do, like sorry, we're just going to disagree. Um
Yeah.
but submit to one another, like guess what? Your wife is part of that one another. Your
Mm-hmm.
husband is part of that as well. And um so I have no problem doing that. And I don't want to make it sound like like we fill out a questionnaire after we have sex. No, it's not like
No, I'm not trying to
rank
imply that.
yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. No,
Oh
it's nothing
Lord,
like
no,
that.
that's
But,
deprecating.
if something happens that one of us is not cool with, um, we're going to talk about it, right? One person say, "Hey, like that wasn't cool,"
Yeah.
or whatever.
And it needs to
Um,
be. That's
yeah.
how you create
So,
safety and good
and this is
emotional health.
this is something when we get into like having talk with kids, like this is another thing where it's weird to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
and we want it to not be weird to talk about. So what do? We just like don't talk about it, and that makes it more weird.
Yep.
So you really just gotta push through and say, hey, like there's something we really do need to talk about. And um do it. Like I find for us, um, money is another area where I'm like, well, she knows this. She just doesn't want to do this.
Mm.
With when it comes to like doing the budget for first time or something like that. And then when we actually have the conversation, we do it and I realize, oh, wow, we were actually on the same page with this. We just kind of assumed that the other person thought a certain thing. And um
You know what
that's
they
not
say about
helpful.
assumptions.
Yeah. 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 And that's true. That's
So
true, right?
no,
So,
that's good. And I think I was kind of bringing it back to the student thing, just because like even I know sometimes the question can be, and we're definitely touching on topics that there are other podcasts who probably do this way better. But like even
yeah.
initiating, how do I have the conversation? Like my wife works from home and we have a daughter and she's a toddler. Now, mind you, sometimes the picture that's painted is that she's never in the mood, and that's probably true. So you have to, there's the old women are crock pots, men are microwaves, yada yada. But there are like I try to be astute enough to know the days where it's like, yeah, this is absolutely off the table. She needs a touch break. The last thing she wants is me. And granted, she'll tell me no. I have no fear saying that on this podcast. She tells me no. I get no a lot. We can talk through fear of rejection and being rejected and how to cope with that another time when I figure it out. But doesn't mean I quit. Doesn't mean I give up. I'm not gonna roll over and be pansy husband. I'm trying to work through some of that. It doesn't mean I'm not doesn't mean I bug her into her doing it either. I'm not saying that I sit there and I'm like, no, I'm gonna nag until I get my way. That's bull crap. But I do try to learn, okay, when she looks really upset, has had a really long day, Amelia's been obnoxious, maybe let's try in a few days when I know she's had a chance to have a break, like on Fridays. Not saying Fridays are day. I'm just Fridays when I get to be at home and Megan can leave the house. That gives her a chance to let reset. Or if there's a chance when she gets to go hang out with some friends, because that helps reset her. Those are ways where I'm studying, going, okay, this might be a better opportunity if it's something that our marriage needs right now is to have sex for me to initiate that. Versus just, hey, I'm home. Let's get it on. Dummy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That would be
anyway,
dummy. Yes, for
that would
sure.
be dummy. So all right, that covers. I think we've covered. If there's anything else you want to add there, we can. But otherwise, I think we're kind of forest of thought off on the rabbit trail. Yeah, the weeds, as you were kept putting it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the reasons I say that is because man, I got way too many of those jokers in my yard and they ain't good, right? This is not good.
It's not good.
So,
Listen, all your
doesn't
grass
allow
down
the
there
healthy
is
grass to
a
grow.
weed. Ugh.
So,
All right, so we what else? All right, so let's talk then. Like for example, we just talked, so I'm married with kids. You're married with kids. Let's navigate, you know, I guess expectations or even maybe some what's a I don't know what the right word is. But sex and be during pregnancy, if we want to help any dudes out that might have questions about that, or any ladies out there who have questions about that. Ladies, if you're still listening to us, I'm super impressed. And I mean, anybody aside from Shauna, I know Shauna will listen all the way through. She's determined and she's made of steel. Um, but
so let me say something, and this would sound like I'm trying to do a solid for the guys out there who have a pregnant wife, but that is not what it is. So Shauna is a trained
oh yeah,
doula, right?
she can help you out, boys
So
or ladies.
anybody who thinks we're just, trying to help the dude who has a pregnant wife get some, right?
Which is not my
Uh
intention.
not the intention. She much better than myself. She can tell you, and I know she'd be happy to do one-on-one. Um, she can tell you all the benefits of a woman having sex while she is pregnant. And just and really just in general. But and I get it, like, there may come a point where you're dealing with, you know, morning sickness and you know,
Oh yeah, yeah,
nausea and some of the other things. And yeah,
yeah.
like there's some things where you earn a pass. Like there were some things where Shauna asked me, like, for example, hey, are you cool if I don't want to get an epidural? I'm like, listen, this is your body. Like, if you think
I
you can
ain't
handle
pushing that
that,
thing out. Yeah.
like, if it was me, like, so Justin, I know we talked about the one flesh thing, right? I get that. However, yo half of that one flesh ain't pushing that baby out. So, yeah. So what I told her is,
Yeah.
I go, look, this is you. If you think you can deal with that, awesome. I think it's great. She has a million reasons for why she did it.
Yeah.
Again, she would be happy to talk with you and tell you why she did that and why she thinks you should or should not do that. However, um, the thing there was, hey, like, I get it. Like, if you need to take a pass because you're not feeling great, if you don't want to get that epidural and you think you can deal with it, I'll be right here to support you the whole way. But like, don't ask me if I think it's okay. Like, I think whatever you can do is great.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to, but that's kind of
Yeah.
that I feel like kind of gets us into talking, about it in this realm of, of pregnancy and whatnot, where I would hope that I'm remembering this correctly, that I gave a whole lot more grace. And it was kind of like, oh, you still want to? Sweet.
Right. And I don't
And
think
that's about as far as I took it.
yeah, you're good. And I don't think we have to go too far into this conversation. Honestly, it ultimately comes down to each couple as to what the limits, what's doable, what's not doable. Um, because I don't want to. I mean, we did not like that 9 months was a. And mind you, I've heard of the couples and marriages. Well, we compromise, we didn't do all the things, blah blah blah. I don't remember honestly how much of that was true for us. Obviously, I hope the second one goes better because there's been some learning curves in our sexual language, like the language of sex. Um, but I think more so I was just trying to get at is for some dudes who are like, and girls who are like just kind of scared at like, is it is it gonna hurt the baby? Am I gonna get you pregnant again? No, right? Chill out. That's more so I think what I wanted to you know what I like? These are real thoughts that people have, where they're like, literally, they feared like they're gonna like hurt the child. First of all, you think highly of yourself, sir. Calm that down.
Yeah, I
Uh,
really apologize if I just laughed at a sincere question someone had. Again,
it's
see the
okay.
comment about my wife being a doula, like that is
Yeah.
probably may have something to do with it. Um, I also I also was on the tail end of Gen X, right?
Mm.
And when I was in school, there was this whole theory of, hey, let's give the kids all of the information and they will then in turn make the right decision. So I say that I had sex ed class, I think like two or three times
Ugh.
between like a middle school
Ugh.
and high school. It was ridiculous. Um, so I only bring that up to say that I knew the answer to that question because again, I had had like sex ed class way too
18
many times.
bazillion times.
Yeah, I
They,
mean, once I think is good. You know, I did the thing in like what was it like? I think seventh grade, where the boys go into this classroom,
oh
the girls go
no.
into this classroom, and you know the teachers do the thing, and answer the questions. Which I don't think they should take questions. They totally should not be taking questions
Not from,
because
yeah.
it's anyway. Um, but so yeah, that happened, I think, once or twice. And then I think in ninth grade, everybody had to take a class, and it
Mm-hmm.
was like, health class, right? But that was a major part of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so that is why um I think all this stuff should be common knowledge, and maybe now they don't do that.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't know what they teach or don't teach. And yeah,
so
I think I just kind of leaned into Megan having some of that, some of this, maybe that's back to the student of wives thing. Like husbands, ask your wife. She knows her body pretty pretty well. So if you got questions about like even outside of pregnancy, just like mechanics, or I kind of go into biology class mode, but it's kind of good to learn because then you're like, oh, okay, this is why, blah, 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 blah. So, anywho, I
yeah,
think we can probably put a pin because again, I don't want to jump too far into that with bringing my own emotions and experience into it. Everybody's experience is different. And I'm,
sure.
and I'm trying to decipher through hearing the way you're talking about it, Chad, with Shauna, and some of the language you're using as far as um oh, I forgot what you said earlier.
Well, and while you're thinking of that, let me just say, like,
I don't
this
remember.
goes in, and I'm sure someone can find an exception, but when it comes to a woman being pregnant, growing a
Mm-hmm.
baby inside of her, that baby is the freaking vampire. That
Mm-hmm.
baby will suck everything out of her so that he or
Everything.
she has all the nourishment that they need. So like they're good. And again, I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, but in our experience, and again, my wife talking to me with the training that she's gone through, um, 9 times out of 10, the issue is the mom taking care of themselves, right? Making sure like, hey, the baby is getting the nourishment, the vitamins, minerals, all this stuff that they need.
Yeah.
Like, mom, you got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so that kind of applies across the board. And
Yeah.
now I am well outside of any realm of expertise that I could ever possibly hope to have. So, Justin, reel me in and let's move on.
All right. Reeling you in. So I think let's talk about um well, there was the having sex when your kids around. We could or even like if you're traveling, maybe you're at the in-laws, it's a state vacation, like I don't know if that one's as necessary to get into. That could just come down to a communication kind of thing. Um, because I kind of want to
Sure.
jump. I kind of want to jump, or maybe we bring that. Maybe we come back to that in a later episode, or at the end of this one. But out of respect for time, I know for you and I, Chad, and for our listeners who are driving and still listening to this without being completely offended and or turned off or disgusted, We love you. Please leave a review, 5 stars. We'd love to see your comments. We really do want you to interact with us. Follow us on
Please.
Instagram, YouTube, all the things.
If you're happy, send us something on Instagram. If you're mad at something we said, send us something on Instagram,
True.
or Facebook or wherever. Don't care. Like, we appreciate all the feedback. So
And
just
if you're not able to leave a full 5 stars, message us and let us know what we can do better. We would love to hear that. So
so
let's talk about having the talk with our children as we prepare the generation we're responsible for raising to go into the world. And I know that last week you and I teased a little bit that both of the student ministries that we're a part of had just gone through some form of a series in regards
yes.
to this conversation. You and I both sat under the Song of Solomon series that Pastor Joby went through, which, if you don't know, Song of Solomon is the most erotic book in the Bible. And I mean, they wouldn't even let Jewish school children until they hit a certain age read it because it's just that toe curling and romantic. So, and it makes us experts in any way, but it has been a recent point of conversation in our worlds. And then honestly, in culture, sex is all the buzz all the time.
Yep. That is something that hasn't changed. So, um, I have a couple little stories, and then I'll share a little bit of how we did it, and like to get your feedback,
All right.
if that's a cool way to do it. So, I remember, I don't remember how old I was. I mean, it had to be post seventh grade, so way too late. But my dad sat me down, and when I caught on to this is the talk,
Oh
I was
no.
like, "Oh, Dad, no, 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 I already know, I already know." And he was
Oh.
like, I don't remember the words he said, but I think he was probably relieved. So, and
Let's know that.
now looking back on it, I kind of wish that I would have just shut up and let my dad talk, because um, I've had to do it twice now. And as far as I'm concerned, any advice would have been probably helpful. So there's that. And then when Pierce was, I believe, in it was second grade or third grade, towards the end of second, beginning of third. I can't remember exactly, but it was that year. And um, he came home from school, and he
Okay.
had this Android tablet that um, you know, we managed all this kind of stuff. And one thing he would do often is he would go to Google and just look up definitions of words.
Mm.
Sounds strange, but this kid, from the time when he was two, his favorite word was like actually,
Yeah, he's a
like
brainiac.
yeah, and just so as a kid had really crazy vocabulary. So he would do this on occasion. Never thought anything of it. Did it this day. Okay, Dad. Hey, um, I don't have any homework. I'm gonna look up some definitions. No problem. Didn't think twice. Did it all the time. Like I said, we're on there all the time. We're managing it. We know what's on there, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just what happens later that night, Shauna's got it. She's sitting in front of the TV or whatever. She's Googling some stuff. So, she busts out the tablet to do it. It's, makes it more convenient that way. And so, um, I think I was probably going to sleep, dozing off, whatever. And she comes in freaking out. So she opened this thing up, and she saw like a pop up, or, some tabs open, or, whatever the case may be. You need to have a talk with your son because, So what she thought was he'd been playing Angry Birds, saw an ad,
Mm.
clicked a thing and clicked a thing and clicked a thing, and somehow
Mm.
got into, some sexual content or whatever. So the next morning, um, I decide, okay, let's leave the house a little bit early for school. These are the pre-homeschool days. So I say let's go out to breakfast and we'll have like a man to man, right? So we go to
In the
Chick-fil-A,
second grade.
right? Yeah. So we go to Chick-fil-A and we sit down and we're chatting. And I'm like, hey buddy, I said, I got something to tell you. I said, last night mom turned on your tablet and she saw some stuff. I was like, I didn't see it, but she was telling me about some stuff she saw. And it made her very, very concerned. And so I'd really like if you would tell me what it was you were doing. And on the inside, I'm freaking out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to play as cool as I can. And so he's like, "Oh, Dad, so here's what happened. So yesterday I was at school and we are at lunch, and these kids are talking about all this freaky stuff, right? Finger quotes, all this freaky stuff." And I say, "What are you guys talking about?" And they say, I found out later these kids both have older sisters. Okay, so you see where this is going. So they said, Pierce, all you got to do, go home and Google sexual intercourse.
Oh my
Right.
gosh.
So third grader, boom, there we are. So he does
Mm.
that. And he's like, Dad, I typed it in and I searched and I saw all this freaky stuff. And so I put it down and I just, I just put it away. I was like, oh, okay.
Mm.
I was like, so do you want to tell me what you saw? You have any questions? He's like, I saw some stuff come up. I just put it down. I was like, oh, okay. And so, we talked a little bit more about school and, I tried to kind of poke around a little bit,
Yeah.
um, without getting him too uncomfortable. And so went home, told Shauna she had gone scorched earth. She uninstalled everything on that freaking tablet.
Scorched earth.
And I was like, hey, I was like, look, here's what happened. And so I don't remember exactly what her response was, but we're like, okay, I gotta do this with him. I gotta have the talk. So she found actually a great thing. It was like a podcast or a YouTuber or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And uh it turns out it was this couple, they have a blog, whatever. And or no, it's a guy. So he used to work for the company, and I know this now. At the time I didn't know it. uh Covenant Eyes, if you know who
Mm-hmm.
that is. They do like content filtering, monitoring, right?
Yeah.
So you can get your iPhone and you can, you know do all the Big Brother stuff on there for your kids if you want, all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, so this guy, um Christian, wrote like, I think it started as like a blog and then like a book or something. Anyway, so we went through them and they have this, like, it's like a 7-part deal for having the talk, and that's what it's called. It's called the talk. And it's kind of devotional style where it mixes scripture, mixes science,
Okay.
and it's scripted. I mean, you can read it word for word. It's pretty well written. Um, I really didn't. Uh, they have some, they pull in some great scriptures just kind of based on how God created us. They talk about like the reproductive cycle, male and female anatomy, right? All that kind of stuff is in there. They talk about, where a baby comes from, a baby,
Not a story.
from sex all the way to birth and the stages and all that kind of stuff. And so what I did with Pierce is every Sunday before church, we'd leave early, we went to like Panera or Starbucks or whatever, and we would just get breakfast and we talk through it. And he, especially at that point in time, he loved science. And so he was very curious, really dug into like the anatomy side of it, the science side, like, a baby developing inside of the mother, like all that kind of stuff was great. And he didn't really have many questions, just kind of there listening and very intently listening and stuff. And so it went well. And it was good because it was talking about like our identity,
Mm-hmm.
um, that, made in God's image, and all the way through. Like that stuff is woven all the way through the thing. And so it was great. Um, Fast forward to Jude. I mean, it went so well. We're like, hey, let's do the same thing. So did the same thing with Jude, and we would go out, and I, tried to make it special. Tried to let him, like, we'd go to like a coffee shop and he'd get anything he wanted, right?
Yeah.
He wanted espresso, he's getting espresso,
Oh
right?
man.
Like, don't care. Now he wasn't. He would get like, well, I mean, I guess technically that's what's in a latte, right? So, but he get a latte, he get a chai, he get a whatever he wanted, and we do breakfast and that, trying to make it good because for him it was much more awkward for him
Mm-hmm.
to the point where I don't know, two, three of these in, I go to wake him up. He's like, I was like, hey, bud, let's go out and get breakfast. Oh, Dad, I really don't want to get breakfast. And I
Do
said,
we
you
have
know
to
what?
talk about it?
I said, buddy, screw it. No, we're really just going to breakfast. We'll talk about whatever you want. Because I didn't want that to be all it was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we, fast forward, we're through all that. Um, I think it went well. If I had to do it all over again, I would probably do it more as like an ongoing conversation,
Mm.
making sure that they were ready for the age they were. Um, uh, and I would start earlier, but not do like dive in all the details when it's like three, you know what I mean? But we
Right.
would start with a conversation about, made in God's image and, he made, men and women different and, all that. Start there and then go from there. I think trying to make it more of a conversation, when we've done that has been good.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like they both respond really well to that. Um, now, I think this thing is good, and we've passed this thing on to a couple of people, and they've done it. They said, it worked well for them too. So, and we could maybe put a link to their thing in the show notes if you want to. It's not huge. I mean, it's a biblically based thing of having
Yeah.
the talk, and it's
That's
not,
awesome.
um, you know, I probably could have sat down and written something and found a few, like, images is not the word, but little like diagrams, right? Because again, it shows like, hey, here's where the baby, develops. Here's,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Like in
think
a doctor's
to,
office.
yeah,
Yeah.
think to when you're in like elementary, middle school, and you're seeing, just diagrams of different parts of a frog or whatever, right? Same kind of deal.
I know. I
Um,
mean, yeah.
and um, so yeah, uh, that's how we did it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying, I think if I had to do it over again, I would probably try to make it just more conversational. But I mean, I don't think it was bad. Um, but I think, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually. Sometimes with my kids, I feel like I have an agenda
Mm.
and I really just want to develop a relationship with them. And yeah, there's some things we need to talk about, but
Yeah.
I don't know, like the more just conversations we can have, the better. And, you kind of do it whatever way works for you, but that's what worked for me. And I would like to weave some of this stuff into more conversations. If nothing else, just to make sure that they're prepared, because, to your point, it's everywhere. I mean, man, when I was 12 or 13, I'm so glad I didn't have a smartphone back then. I mean, I think the worst thing I got into is, I probably said some stuff I regretted on AOL Instant Messenger, right? But most people do not know how to take a screenshot of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and your
Hopefully
history
those
only goes back so far.
hopefully those
So,
records are
oof.
erased. Yeah.
So,
No, I mean I think you can still have conversation with your kids. Like just because you've now officially gotten through the maybe agenda is the right word, or the curriculum piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? They now know the proper mechanics, but I think as far as a whole, like, you don't stop there. It's just you don't
Oh, for
bring it.
sure.
And I'm sure you're doing this, so I'm sure I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
some clarity.
And
But yeah,
that's the talk, right?
yeah, yeah.
That we did, but is it, are there ongoing things? Absolutely there
I would hope
are.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Like
know
you
they
talk
probably
about,
want it to be over, but
yeah, and and now it can be very, now that we've covered the basis. Um,
mm-hmm,
now we can talk about, like, oh, first relationship,
mm,
um,
mm-hmm.
and we can just build on that as needed for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, as much as a lot of people would like it to be like a one and done kind of deal, that's just that's not gonna
No.
fly, especially if you think about, like we've been talking about, just how it's like in your face everywhere you go. Especially when you're down here and you live like 2 minutes from the beach.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not gonna go away.
No.
So there you are.
Woo.
So you have any thoughts on that, or any, I mean, and granted, I know, like, your kid is like still
Two.
really little
Oh yeah.
concerning some of this kind of
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
but um
Um.
you got any thoughts there? You
No,
wanna move on?
I like the way, man. I like the way. Well, I know you'd mentioned you had like two stories, or you wanted to share your experience, and you had a question for me. Which maybe that was your question. I like the intentionality of setting aside a time for it. I know for Jude, he got to a point where he's like, "Oh no, Dad's
Yeah,
getting me up to talk about sexual intercourse again," and um that stink, that stinks, but like I get that. Some kids, that's how it's gonna be. But I think what is cool is you're setting aside. I think what's cool too is I know, like, you've shared on here before, like, that's not the only time you've set aside special times with your kids. It's not just talk about sex. Like, you and
for sure.
Pierce met up and read through Radical. I think you're doing something similar again with Jude. Or if you aren't, you will. Like, that's in you.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I think that's awesome. I think I'd like to do that. I don't know how I do it with Amelia. I feel like Megan's gonna probably have the reins on a lot of that because it's female to female, and it probably means for Amelia it starts a little bit younger because she has to think through cleaning certain parts that we as dudes don't have to think through cleaning. And then there's, the period. And there's all this other stuff that comes a running a little bit sooner for females, and they're just more mature than we are. Dudes are slow. Love you, dudes, but we're slow. Um, but no, I like that there was an intentionality to it. I like that it was not just one singular. All right, son, here's the birds and the bees, and you got this tool, and she's got this thing, and here's how it works. Be careful with it. Like, I'm glad it wasn't that.
I
And
don't know
then
what that was.
listen, that's kind of just how my dad did it. Is we were like, he picked me up from a youth group ice skating activity, and we start driving home, and he just talks about it. I don't even know how he set it up. All I knew was, like, well, I think I went home with more questions than I wanted, and it wasn't questioning to begin with. And I was just like, okay. And I didn't feel confident enough to even be like, so Dad, I have questions. And he didn't bring my mom into it. My mom didn't know that he had the talk with me until I was like 19. I was like, oh, hey, yeah, by the way, like, there was this one time she goes, oh, okay, good to know. Um, I mean, it wasn't a horrible, but it wasn't a conversation. It was literally just like him, I think, feeling like he had to do his part as a dad to be like, I mean, make sure my son knows how his doohickey works. And like, so he can reproduce later. And like, that's how it felt. Like, that's just how it felt, was this
Yeah.
like checkbox of fatherhood. And I think we need to be, especially as fathers, like, we're still stewarding our kids and our family when we have those conversations. And so the way you steward the conversation is going to set an expectation of how your children then react to it, or even what they do with
Yeah.
that information.
Yeah. And um, one of the things that I really like about the stuff we use is they talk about the don't make it weird thing, because it
Mm.
doesn't need to be weird. It is weird, but it doesn't need to be that way.
Right.
And you know, one of the things that I've seen through all of this is like, as parents, we're hesitant. Shoot, are we going to talk about too much too early? Or what's the deal? But for me, the more important thing is that I don't want my kid to be faced with a situation when it comes to this, and it has no tools to deal
Right.
with it.
Right. Or even from
Right.
a reference.
Um, yeah, so I would say the earlier you can start to do this, even if it's something as simple as, listen, you were made in the image of God,
Mm-hmm.
as is every other person you will ever meet. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to treat them that way.
Yeah.
Like, that's a
Yeah.
great first step. Um, but uh and I will say, I heard this. I thought it was an overgeneralization. Turned out to be true for me. And that is, when you think it's time, it's too late.
Mm.
Like when you think that it's time for you to go ahead and start having those conversations, you probably should have already done it before then.
Mm.
And I don't know, that 6 months, a year, kind of depending on when you had it. It was too late for me. Um, and so uh those are my thoughts. So it's what, it's a thing.
It's a
uh
thing.
yeah. And I just feel like this is a perfect transition. So um uh so we did talk about how there was kind of that uh dating, relationships, sex kind of series that,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know, both of our youth ministries, our student ministries went through. And um I had a pastor talk to me about this, and he said something that was great. It was kind of something that I was kind of thinking, but I was like, I don't really know how I feel about that. And he
Mm.
really just solidified it for me, because you have the dynamic of the kids who don't come
Yeah.
because the parents aren't letting them come because, oh, I haven't had that talk with little Johnny,
Right.
or I just don't know. Um, and the only thing I would say to encourage somebody to send the kid to that thing is that, you know, and this is something that was told to me, and I really agree with it. If you're going to a church where you're going to drop your kid off and you're going to be confident that they are going to hear the word presented in a way that you think is consistent with scripture, and they're doing it, in the best way they can, and
Mm-hmm.
you're two thumbs up in that area. um, why would you not trust them to deliver, you know, relationships, dating, sex in a way that is just as faithful
Mm-hmm.
to the scriptures as, say, um, finances,
Any other conversation.
or literally
Any other conversation.
any other
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
um and so and granted, those parents, they're able to make that decision for their family, and they're also doing the best that they can. But I really think they're missing out, and their kids are missing. First of all, that you have a kid that's in middle school or high school whose parent is not letting them come because they haven't had that conversation with them. Like,
Too late.
a, a lot of those kids are having that conversation elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that would be one thing that was eye opening for me. Is it's like, you're gonna let them speak in your kid's life in just about any other area, but when it comes to this, you're like, first of all, I got it, but not yet. But
Yeah.
my kid's gonna have to miss out. So anyway, I maybe that's a little bit of a cynical view, but My heart really goes out to the kid, really, like, parent, like, y'all figure it out. Like, have the talk, send them anyway, whatever. But I'm like, man, that kid is not being equipped. He is not being given the tools in this area to have success in life. And that royally sucks for them.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
biased opinion, but that's what we're here for, right?
A little bit of biased opinions. I agree with pretty much all of your sentiments, um, especially as being the one who was teaching this, which that's
For sure.
man, that's a hard thing to walk into to teach. Um, you want to be full of both grace and truth.
Oh, dude, I do not envy you. I had to sit
Yeah.
in on those on our end, and man, like
It's so
those were,
delicate.
yeah. And I really appreciate the way it was done because it was done in a way of grace. And hey, we know everybody's coming into this having a different experience, coming from a
Right.
different area, blah blah blah. So I love the way it was done on our end, and I'm sure you had, a lot of grace and truth in
I
there as well
tried.
from your
I
side.
definitely
But
I definitely tried. I know some kids walked away, and that's just nature of those. Some kids, I heard this line said at a conference this weekend. Went to a student pastor conference, and they said the gospel will always be offensive to those who are perishing. Um,
ooh,
not
I feel
saying
like
that.
I've heard that somewhere.
I'm sure it's not an isolated quote. Um, and Joby's probably said something very similar. And this is not to say that like that the sex conversation is of equivalent magnitude to the gospel. However, if you're going to have a high view of scripture and you're going to be responsible for teaching it, then every ounce of scripture should point to the gospel or be driven from it. And so when I teach on sex, I am going to teach with a biblical mandate while also leaning into, hey, there's grace at the end of this. But I had a few students who, because one of my main points was that God designed sex. So sex within the bounds of marriage between a man and a woman for a lifetime. Is shameless sex, that's where they tuned out, and that was towards the beginning, and so they felt like I was shaming them because of their past, which I tried in week 3 when I talked through guardrails to kind of reference back and go, guys, like, if I was like, I'm aware some of y'all left with this notion of like feeling ashamed, etc. So forth. I said, guys, like, I have my own junk. Like, I've got my own baggage and points of shame. And if it wasn't for God's grace, I wouldn't be on this stage. Like, I wouldn't have this opportunity. Like, there is nothing in my story that would allow me to look down my nose at somebody else for their past, especially students. Joby always says you can't look up at the cross and down at somebody else at the same time. So, all that to say, one quick funny story, and then we can kind of jump back into my thoughts on it because I had a few conversations with students that I thought were kind of entertaining. But I had one parent tell me that she has a 6th grade son and I sent the email out, right? Like, I did my due diligence, made sure parents knew it was coming. Like, listen, I try to make sure that I get as few hate emails as possible. So I had warned her. She was like, yeah, I thought about it. I thought about it. She goes, we ended up deciding to sit him down and have the talk. She goes, it's funny because she told her husband, she goes, I just had the conversation about sex with him before the conversation about Santa not being real.
Oh man.
He's one of those. I mean, he's sweet. He's such a sweet kid. So, but she trusted, and like, to your point though, she's trusting the church to be a safe enough place for her students to hear a perspective and a teaching on sex that is not going to be what she knows that her kids are going to hear in the world. And so this is where I had a few middle school boys, and I love, now mind you, I have some of my middle school guys are dumb, as they all are, and then some of them are friggin'
Spoken like a true youth pastor.
oh yeah. I make fun of middle schoolers as much as possible. It's so bad. I'm so offensive sometimes. I got to work on that. But I have some who are incredibly astute, who are incredibly intelligent, and I had a couple. talked to me after, and it's funny because their reports contradict their small group leaders. But they're telling me, they're like, hey, Justin, maybe in the future you send out like a survey and offer a separate night for students who want to come and hear about sex. I was like, okay. I was like, all right. And then a few of them were like, well, none of us took any notes. And I was like, why? Because you were ashamed to write the word sex on your piece of paper? No, we couldn't focus or pay attention. That's why it was. We couldn't focus. Now, that's the students' report. Let me tell you, my small group leader, this is the boys. All right, I'm talking about the boys mainly. The girls did not have any hardly inkling of a small group conversation about sex. They were too ashamed, I guess. Or not ashamed, but like they're all really young and like this kind of goes. Their small group leaders from my middle school boys said that was the best small group they had ever had.
Oh,
that their
wow.
that their students never once got distracted or lost attention during the message, during the sermon, during the talk, whatever you want to call it. That they were engaged the entire time, which doesn't surprise me. I'm talking about a word that like you giggle half the time when it comes up. Like, yeah, of course you're gonna lean in. I said sex from stage in church. Doesn't happen as much as it should. So it was funny because that's the, and then a lot of those dudes not only engaged but like were super honest about some stuff going on in their lives. And so I'm hearing this, so I looked to one of these kids, and it's funny because one of these middle school boys has told me, he goes, yeah, I want to be a youth pastor. In fact, I want to come back here in like 10 years and take your job. And I'm like, okay, bold. So I looked at him and I kind of crushed his soul, and I didn't mean to be this mean, but I looked at him, I said, let's just call him Joe for the sake of this conversation. It's not his real name. I said, Joe, let me ask you. I said, does the world care about your feelings on this conversation? Does the world care enough to ask you if they can talk to you about this topic? He looked at me. He was like, oh, and I said, dude, it's everywhere, man. I said, from your cell phone, social media, driving up. We have one of the sex stores that's up here in popular here in our little area has now taken out full billboards. Like there is a full billboard advertisement for their sex toy store or shop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've seen billboards for breast enhancement, for other things. Like it's everywhere. And I looked at him and said, the world does not care. And I said, as your youth pastor, as the shepherd responsible for you at this time, I said, it is my duty and obligation and responsibility to at least provide you some manner of a truthful teaching on this topic. I would being you a disservice if I did not talk about this. Hopefully he felt that was out of love. It was a little harsh. It was a little tough. But that's where we're at, is like, I am not going to sit here and go, okay, if you want to have a sex seminar, like we're going to talk about it and you're going to show up or you're not. And I'm going to teach you the truth on it biblically, starting in Genesis. And then I usually work out of First Corinthians. That's usually where I end up landing with Paul. He's got a lot of good stuff that he writes on. It can feel a little bit heavier because it's Paul. And Paul to the Corinthians was kind of giving them a 2x4 to the face when it came to their sexual conduct. Does not mean I'm taking that same 2x4 to my students, but I'm showing them, hey, you need to be fleeing from sexual immorality. Do not attach yourself in this way through this method as best as you can. But the other thing that Paul is good about is redemption. My favorite passage recently that was First Corinthians, I think it's 6:9-11. And in this passage, it starts out real down, Debbie Downer. I ain't gonna lie to you. He's like, hey, the following people do not inherit the kingdom of God. And he's like, idolaters, those who are sexually immoral, homosexuals, thieves, liars, and everybody's like, "Ooh, I feel gross." He repeats it again in Galatians. We talk about the fruit of the spirit. He talks about works of the flesh. But he says these will inherit the kingdom. My favorite part is because at the end of that list, Paul turns around and goes, "And such were some of you," past tense. But
Yep.
you were justified, and you were sanctified, and you were something else. what is that? Is redeemed, maybe purchased? I forget. Through the blood of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. That to me. And so I tried to end that. Like I tried to preface the whole series with that passage. And I tried when we talked about sex specifically at the very end, I said, and I said, I know that some of you have already done this thing, are doing it, or potentially will do it. Again, part of my story. Right. And I'm like, and such were some of us. But through Jesus, through the gospel, does not have to be our story. And so I really tried, I tend to be, I guess it doesn't always feel like grace from me because I'm a little more like cut and dry. But that's part of me trying to show truth with love is like telling you, I gotta tell you the hard things. Love is not just sitting by and saying it's okay. We'll fix it next. Like you have to say hard things sometimes. So I don't know. It's a hard thing. I think I'll probably teach it a little bit differently next year. I don't know how much differently. Like I'm not gonna back down on certain things where I'm like, this is a core doctrine of what I believe, you know? But the delivery and communication of it, because you are dealing, like I think I'd rather teach it to college students because you can be a little more just like because they don't have hormones firing.
One thing I've heard at 1122 in different contexts, but around the topic of like this is kind of offensive and people are going to hear it and think, well, it's been a nice run,
Yeah.
I've heard Joby do this. I've heard Stephen Perry do this. Where they both say like, hey, we're going to talk about some stuff that's going to be hard for some of y'all to hear. But a couple things we want you to know is number one, you mean all this out of love, definitely not condemnation. But the other thing is, hey, Megan. But the other thing is, the other thing is that, we are not shying away from the truth because we want you to know it. Right? We want you to know the truth. And if you are in an environment where someone is not giving you the truth, then, they're really choosing to not love you in that moment.
Yeah.
And even though we have a lot of people that will still disagree with what is said, I think for the most part, they're not getting condemnation. It's more of, how can you really believe that? You know what I mean? Like that normal thing. But now granted, I have 6th grade boys. And they're like they are not, for the most part, struggling with their sexual identity, their gender identity. Like these are not things that they're really even talking about.
Yeah, and I didn't even touch, man.
The girls, and I don't know any specific examples, but I know some of the older and the guys too, right? I mean, probably some more hardcore conversations going on there, but mine were we actually kind of had to pivot and talk more in some of our group time just about like general like identity in Christ, that kind of stuff, because it was just like so anyway, that was but I really appreciate the parents that are like my kid needs the gospel. He's coming, right? Whether he or she may not want to come, they're going to be there. And, we, from someone who's on the outside looking in, we really try really hard to, to make sure that everyone is feeling valued, but at the same time, they are getting the truth out of the word. So, that's it's not easy, but I think that there is some fruit from that, because I can see following that whole group of sermons that were done, I see more connection And then at the end of the day, that's definitely something we're going for. So
yeah.
Boom. Well, I'm glad we solved sex there. So
the world is a better place for it. No, I do think we should probably shut it down here. So for those of you listening out there, as we wrap up tonight, just like we talked about tonight, this does not have to be a one-stop talk. In fact, if there's something you're like, hey, I wish you guys had talked about this, man, leave us a DM. Seriously, message, whether it's our private accounts or you message the podcast on like the Instagram account. We'd love to hear about it. I think if you listen directly through the podcast for Spotify app, there's a way you can message the podcast directly through that. I would have called it Anchor, but Spotify recently bought it and rebranded and some stuff. But yeah, leave us a review. Definitely send us a DM if there's something more we can talk about. Leave it in a comment on the YouTube. And we'd love to definitely come back and have those conversations. These are important conversations to have. And we ultimately want to make sure, just like Chad was saying at the end, know that you're loved. We love you. We wouldn't have these conversations if we didn't love you. And like, we want to see dads succeed. We want to see husbands succeed. We want to see marriages succeed. And this is one of those places where the more people are talking about it and just having communication, I think the better for it.
Yeah, could not agree more. Absolutely.
Chad, we just saw my wife come through on the camera, so I'm going to go spend the last waking moments of today with her.
Yeah, I do not blame you for that. So I'm going to go do the same thing on my end. And before long, head will be hitting that sweet pillow. And yeah, my eyes are already drooping. Justin, it is late.
Mine are too. It's late.
So with that, we will close this episode of the Dad Report. It's been real.
10-4, good sir. 10-4. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can support us by sharing the show with your friends and family. Please subscribe, rate, and leave a review.
Want more of the Dad Report? Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and even join the community over on Discord. Don't forget to send us your dad jokes for a chance to be featured on the show.
Remember the words of Billy Graham about fatherhood. A good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, and yet one of the most valuable assets in our society.
So if you are a dad, we're cheering you on. If you have a dad, be kind to him. And if you know a dad, tell him about our podcast.